The perception of stress equally contributes to its damaging effects on the body too. Half of what you read in the journals contains statistical errors, right? There are many different challenges with AI. Inconsistencies, there's data drift, there's hallucinations, there's contaminations, there's...
Jake Carter is the founder of the Institute of Health and the global leader in functional medicine education. With over 16 years of experience, he has trained thousands of health professionals from more than 40 countries, and his graduates collectively impact over 20,000 clients and patients every single year. How does someone know that they are stressed? Like, what are some of the cues?
We've got different stages of stress, and I'm just going to really generalize this. That accounts for 80% of the health span gains, which contribute towards longevity. Those three things. And it's not sexy, but it's true.
How would you describe the mission that you are on?
Yeah, so it's a big question, that, Adam, really, really big question. Ultimately, we're on the overarching mission with the Institute to provide university-grade education based on real-world results, because we see most of the issues in society these days, the root cause of that is ultimately from a lack of proper education. And we can, I'm sure we're probably going to get onto this later on as to why I believe that's the case. But equally, a synonymous mission, because we have two main businesses, is to really provide personalized health in the palm of your hands. And that's to really put an end to generalized or generic ranges as such, because ultimately millions of people, potentially soon to be billions of people, die unnecessarily because of the lack of standardization, the lack of integration from true research to modern day accessibility. So we believe health should be in the palm of your hands. That's our motto, so to speak.
Well, I think we are definitely living through a very interesting time right now. We can see how biohacking, the longevity movement is on the rise. So there is like more and more solutions. There is more and more care. But when we look at chronic disease, for example, they still continue to rise despite the more care in today's world. So there were also a couple of statistics on your website, which is like 1 in 2 people have a chronic disease, 1 in 4 Americans have diabetes, 1 in 10 people have ADHD, 1 in 4 people have allergies. So there's just so many things are happening. And also, if you look at the statistics about autism, back in the 50s and the 60s, there was like 1 in 10,000. Now it's 1 in 32. So why do you think that this chronic disease continue to rise despite more care?
Yeah, brilliant. And by the way, with the website, those stats are old, right? So the stats have actually got much worse now. When we look into, it's pretty bad. Like 8 out of 10 people are sick, okay? And in regards to Australia, 84% of the disease is non-communicable disease, and it's generally down to lifestyle, nutrition, those sort of factors there too. And ultimately, I'm of the view that we're not necessarily living longer, we're dying longer. And that's because we've got a disharmony with how our body's been designed and evolved versus how we're actually living in life. We're living in life through convenience, through temptation, through subliminal messaging, just at the fingertips. We can get food, and it used to be a drive-through where you didn't have to get out of the car. Now it's an Uber Eats and it gets delivered to your door. So we're sacrificing just these simple ways of living for modernized technology. And there's a really good quote which I think sums it up. And the quote says, we have caveman emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. And I think that just really shows the disharmony on 3 layers of why our health is possibly not where it should be based on the technology advancements that we have.
So if you look at the holistic healthcare system, and if you could just maybe potentially point out one thing or fix one thing that you think that would eliminate most of the issues that we experience as individuals, what would be that one thing that you would fix? What's the biggest bottleneck in your opinion?
From the holistic healthcare or the healthcare system? So we've got conventional or holistic?
Conventional healthcare system.
Okay, cool. In regards to this, it would be how the doctors are trained on reading blood work, because blood work is, nearly done on every patient they see. Okay, if not, they say, when was your bloods last done? And if it was done recently, then they wouldn't order a test. So they're accessing the data, but they just don't know how to turn that data into information and then implementation. And that's due to many different levels. You know, they're using the wrong ranges, they're viewing the body through the lens of a keyhole, they're not really looking at bio-individual ranges, they're not looking at control variables prior to getting the blood drawn, and there's all these inconsistencies, inaccuracies, and a lack of appreciation to what blood can actually tell them. And if they utilize that, how most people expect them to be utilizing it, it would massively change the global economic burden of disease, and also our quality of life and quantity of life. And ultimately, that would enable reinvestment from governments into innovations and technologies and education and support. And the world as we know it would completely change, just simply because there's less of a disease burden, because people are actually utilizing blood work more, or more appropriately.
We can see that there is also so many companies just popping up. So there is Mito here in Singapore, and I think they're also in the States. There is Function Health in the States. There is Lucy in Europe. And there's just so many of these companies just started to appear over the past couple of years, right?
Yeah.
And they are heavily focused on blood work. And the way they do it is that they have a subscription model, and then you pay like $500 a year. Then you get your blood work done. They store the data, they analyze the data, and then they also leverage AI. So, like, do you think like this is the direction that we should be taking?
Well, without naming any companies, they all, I can say this because I've assessed, right? They all lack proper control variables prior to the blood draw, which then leads to a level of inaccuracies. Okay, so for example, with men, not riding your bike within 3 days of getting your blood drawn is going to be key. People don't mention that because it can change PSA levels, or not having sex before getting your blood drawn because your prolactin levels can change, or not going in the sauna for 3 days before getting your blood drawn because AST and ALT may change. All of these things, right? So the collecting data, but it's a bit of a challenge, right? Because they also do it in separate collections many times. Like one particular large company, they'll take a collection sample, and then 2 weeks later, they'll send you for your other collection sample. And there's so much things which can happen in those 2 weeks, particularly for females, right? You have the follicular phase and the luteal phase of the cycle. And then what we're also seeing is that there's a mass over-reliance on AI. Don't get me wrong, AI has its place in the healthcare system. But right now, there are many different challenges with AI. And it's kind of being... they're outsourcing their experience and skill to AI, and there's inconsistencies, there's data drifts, there's hallucinations, there's contaminations, there's issues with feedback loops and quality decay, there's vulnerabilities, there's overgeneralizations, there's chat fatigue, and then there's always the question of data ownership and access ambiguity in terms of who actually is accessing that data. So a lot of these emerging companies are utilizing AI too much, and the AI is trained on data which is potentially biased as well. I mean, when we look at the large consensus of data, which people generally abide by, we know that before it's put into medical practice, it's going to take 17 years as a minimum for only 14% of what's researched today before it's put into medical practice. And then even when looking into the literature, there's an abundance of issues with the literature itself. It's half of what you read in the journals half of what you read in the journals contains statistical errors, right? Okay, so even if it is from a published medical journal, we know from the literature that up to half of them contain statistical errors. So there is all of these challenges there, from even when it's using its large language model and its data pulling and data assimilation, that is the study reliable? Is it specific for the individual? Let alone those previous 8 issues, what I just mentioned with AI. So I think a lot of these companies, they should be built on IP and not AI. But unfortunately, most people are building them on AI and not IP.
And when you say that there are these statistical errors, what kind of statistical errors are in the studies?
There's tons of different examples. Okay, so one example that I could share with you just off the top of my head, this isn't even a statistical error. This just shows you how damaging intentions can be, right? Okay, when they're not for the greater good. There's a study done in JAMA, the Journal of American Medical Association, okay, reputable journal, really reputable journal, and it looked into adverse events from Tdap vaccinations with pregnant mothers, okay? And what they actually did in the study is that any pregnant mother which experienced a spontaneous abortion, a miscarriage, was removed and excluded from the study. So then the conclusion of the data looked like it was good. But when you read the exclusion factors, you could see, oh, hang on a second, all the people which had a negative experience were removed from the study, and then now obviously there was a rebuttal and the paper was redacted, but that just shows you just one example of a very serious situation which was able to be published in one of the most reputable journals in the world, okay? So if that's that extreme example, then there is, other examples of placebos not being placebos, right? Okay, so it's like, you see this all the time. You see, is it actually saline or is it, some other things there? Is it actually a placebo pill or is it actually a lactose pill? And some people may be more lactose sensitive or intolerant, and that's going to lead to an adverse event in terms of their digestive system from taking the placebo, which then could make the thing what they're assessing seem better as such. So yeah, there's levels to this, and when looking into the data, there's actually 10 different ways to assess published medical journals or just published journals in general to make sure that they're reliable. And unfortunately, that's not being done.
This reminds me to something that I think Peter Attia wrote in his book. And I think the example that he gave was that they did the study on alcohol, or maybe it was Andrew Huberman, I can't remember, one of them was saying this. And then the result of the study was that alcohol in small amount is actually good for you and you are going to live longer. But what they forgot to include was that the people who were drinking a small amount of alcohol, they were doing a bunch of other stuff as well in order to maintain their health. They were moving, they were exercising, they were sleeping well and all of that. And the other control group that was like not drinking as much, but they didn't do any of this like basic things as like, sleep, nutrition, health, then they were like dying sooner. Then the study came out as like, okay, alcohol is good for you. But then they completely didn't actually consider all the other factors that people were doing in order to live a healthier life.
It's like the Finnish sauna study, right? Okay. And it found that men who regularly went and had a sauna 2 to 3 times per week had a greater life expectancy and less occurrence of disease. What they didn't factor in that is the social interaction. And we know from other studies in terms of longevity, social interaction and social integration, where you have a sense of belonging outside of yourself, these are vital components. But they just looked at the environment they were in rather than the activity they were also engaging in. But then the study concluded it was on the sauna, not the community benefit there. So there's always these kind of like levels of contextual analysis where we have to have this meta cognition and think, oh, well, what else is there outside of this which isn't taken into account right now? And unfortunately, it's kind of missed. It's kind of missed in not just the world of AI, but it's also missed so much in terms of the health industry. People are grasping onto stuff which is shiny and it looks fantastic and it looks new, but they forget what's true. I mean, we see this popularized with BPC 157, right? Which is a peptide. Everyone knows what BPC 157 is these days. But if you look into PubMed, there is only 183 studies ever done on the thing. And a lot of the studies were actually done on dogs in Croatia. I think they were actually done in Zagreb. That's where it was kind of initially produced and found. So when we look into this, there's social media and podcasts and popularity which put it on a pedestal. And don't get me wrong, there's some certain use cases which can be super effective, but it's being overused in relation to the density of data what it currently has. And we see that with like Ozempic, and we could see the recent side effect of that was the issue with going blind, and these people were just waking up from going blind, but yet it was just mass produced and mass adopted and recommended, but yet the longitudinal data in terms of long-term health risks or benefits wasn't substantiated yet, and then everyone's just being the guinea pig. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing everyone which is grasping onto what's new versus what's true.
So how can we know what is true? Because now we live in the world where I go on social media, I see a bunch of different kind of reels and posts about a specific topic or hack or peptides or whatnot, right? And that's the same with blood work as well. And so I think my question is that like how do you draw that line? Like where would someone should actually find reliable information that they can trust rather than just what they are exposed to?
Yeah, so there's some communities I'm in, right? Okay, and there's a motto which says don't trust, verify. Okay, so in regards to this, it's like even if the information is presented in front of you, still, if you still have to go check, and that you have to have that level of due diligence, and that comes into either being presented, with the published medical journals. This is the outcome. This is the inclusion criteria. This is what it was done. This is the p-value. This is the study size. And another thing as well, right? When we look into these studies, a lot of them are done on community dwellers or individuals walking in to pick up their script, right? Where they can share their health information and data to the researchers. But the individuals which go and pick up their medication or go to the doctors most frequently are generally those with comorbidity or generally those taking polypharmacy, which therefore leads to an unhealthy user bias. So therefore the literature, what we have, does it actually translate to a healthy user cohort, which maybe some of these listeners are going to fall into that category because they've already taken their own health initiative to take it into their own hands. So yeah, if people are learning and wherever you're learning from isn't presenting you with not only the references but the published literature up in front on screen showing you the granular detail, you have to go out there and do your own research on your own back to verify it for yourself. That's how I view it, because there's a lot of people sharing inaccuracies to, promote themselves, to get something viral, to add some controversy, and to have that hyperbole and just kind of get more fame. But the reality is the people which have the short straw from that aren't these influencers as such. They're the people which adopt and blindly trust what the influencers are saying and then implement it and create harm for themselves or even worse for their clients or patients.
Well, let's say that I'm one of those individuals that is always skeptical about what influencers say because everybody has an agenda, right? But I think the second line of defense would be that most people use is that go to ChatGPT, right? So that's the research that I'm doing, that I'm going to ask ChatGPT. I can even pop in my blood work there. So what would you say to people who use ChatGPT and AI module as their main point of reference?
Yeah, it uses, again, it's trained largely on the conventional data and the conventional belief systems. And if it's trained on our current consensus, and our current consensus isn't really working for us because there is an ever-growing increase of disease and comorbidity, and there's all these issues in the world, then we have to change how we think in terms of what we prioritize and how we work with the body. Because it's not just about having information, it's about having implementation of that information. So for example, you might find out that, you've got these particular issues, but ChatGPT isn't going to go through what we call the priority of dysfunction and navigate through the sequential order of a root cause healing approach, because healing happens in layers rather than a linear system. It's not going to provide you with that, right? And there's so many levels where we can see there's a study done in Wisconsin, and it found that there's inaccuracies up to 60% of the time. And this study was done in 2024. Whoa. Obviously, it's 2025 now. But there's this huge level of inconsistency there, like huge. And there's another study which showed that the 03 and 04 model on ChatGPT had a level of accuracy which was 53%, right? Which was just slightly better than guessing, right? So when you look into this, you really have to question, well, where is this data trained? Is that data, first of all, the data which is currently adopted in a large consensus? Yes. So is that reliable? Secondly, it doesn't take into the bioethnicity, right? Okay, so we know when we look into rangers, for example, we know that individuals from African American descent, they generally have a TSH level which is best for them being below the white Caucasian range. And we know that individuals which are Asian, with Asian ethnicity, they have a much lower MCV than white Caucasians as well. So there's all these different changes what we have to take into account. And then there's the age. So it's not doing that. It's not going, okay, cool, what's your ethnicity? Cool. what's your age? Cool. Let's cross-correlate with this with the subjective factors, because there's 1,866 areas on the human body you can assess, and subjective information gives us the story, objective data gives us the detail. You need to marry both of those together to really get the complete picture, and if you don't, you're only looking at one side of the story. So it's not there yet, it's not there yet. And we can see that with many different things, with typically just alone with the chat fatigue. If you have a thread and it keeps going again and again, there's the chat fatigue there, but there's also the hallucinations where it'll start to conjure up an idea or a fallacy of something occurring, and it's not right. I mean, we see it just with the example of the inconsistencies, where it provides a URL link, and you go to click that URL link, and it doesn't take you anywhere, right? Okay, so there's a growing level of issues where people are putting too much trust into AI right now, and most people are just using ChatGPT wrappers, where they're saying they've developed an LLM, and it's just a wrapper around ChatGPT as such. So I think it's definitely the right direction, but we're not there yet. We're definitely not there yet.
During our intro call, you said something I found very interesting, that we are actually living through the fourth wave of medicine. So to me, that's like innovation. And I thought that like AI is the cornerstone of that innovation. Can we maybe dive a little bit into this one? That what is the fourth wave of medicine, and what are some of those components that we consider as part of this?
Yeah, sure. And don't get me wrong, I sound very pessimistic, right? But I do believe over the next 10 years, we're going to have much greater advancements and bigger transformations in regards to our health than over the last 200 years, right? I am of that large belief for that. But I just think right now, a lot of people are mesmerized that ChatGPT can do the next thing than Google, and it's not quite what everyone has that hopium sold on. So in regards to the fourth wave of medicine, I think it's really important that we understand where we've come from, where we are, and then where we're going, because that way we can see the evolution and how things change as such. So the first age of medicine, that was generally like the 1800s up until 1950s. And this was all based on the kind of age of infection. And this was the sort of premises of find it, cut it, kill it, so to speak. And it was really focusing on acute illness, infections, things like injury, that sort of thing. And it was prescribing surgery, antibiotics, and x-rays were, apparent around then too. So that was great, and the breakthroughs was that whole premises of germ theory. I mean, there's the whole side of, is germ theory actually the correct thing? We have all these different beliefs around that, and we can possibly entertain both sides of the fence. Then as we advance, we go to the 1950s, right? And this is where we enter medicine 2.0. And this is really where we look into chronic disease management. And that's the whole premises of every ill for a pill. And the main focus here was there was a lot on cardiovascular disease, a lot on diabetes, a bit on cancer, but the main premises here was cardiovascular disease. And we could see a lot of the literature really been focused around that. Look at the cholesterol myth, for example, which is, arguably responsible for more deaths than Stalin and Hitler combined. And then we can see the main tools, what they integrated here for the second age of medicine was a lot of pharmaceuticals. They were doing pharmaceuticals, and they're doing specialist referrals as such. But it's viewing disease in isolation from a generalized approach, okay? And it was very fragmented care, and it was like a one-size-fits-all kind of approach there. Then we've entered, and what we're in right now, but we're exiting, we're in, but kind of dipping our toes in medicine 4.0. But medicine 3.0, this was all about personalization and prevention. And this was more about preventing the disease and having a personalized approach and entertaining the idea of root cause ideology and looking into longevity. And this is where we can see things like genomics, wearables, microbiome testing, functional blood work. And this is where it's all expanded, and it's rather than taking a unilateral approach, it's taken an all systems biology perspective here, right? And that's fantastic. It's great. And then we're moving into medicine 4.0. And I say we're moving into it. Some of these things have been around for a few years, and we've just been discussing some of them. And medicine 4.0 is really about predict, simulate, and self-correct. And the focus here is about continuous optimization, real-time adaptation. It's about ambient diagnostics, right? Which are diagnostics which are assessing how you are on a daily basis rather than going for your quarterly blood check, so to speak. And the tools that are integrated here in Medicine 4.0, obviously, we've just been discussing about AI. We've got human in the loop AI, which is personally right now, I think that's the main focus. Human in the loop AI is definitely the stepping stone we need rather than outsourcing it entirely on AI. And how I mean by that is AI can be utilized on the back end to review anonymized data and to find patterns and correlations and things there. But then it still needs that final overview from the human. And I think that's a great stepping stone, right? And we've got things like machine learning, we've got digital twins, we've got predictive analytics, synthetic biology, we've got continuous biomarkers, and we're starting to see multi-biomarkers which are wearables. So like, for example, it's not just going to be looking into glucose, it may be looking into other things. We know that uric acid is a wearable which can, a wearable you can have is uric acid. We'll get there. A wearable that you can have is to assess uric acid, right? Okay. And that's going to be fantastic for people with gout. So that's kind of that medicine 4.0, so to speak. And it's fantastic because, it's harnessing that tech, what we've developed, but there still has to be, in a high tech world, high touch. And high touch is that element of human interaction. And it's quite ironic because when we do look into longevity, when we look into, like we were just discussing, is it the factor if someone smokes or not which determines the strongest predictor of longevity? No. Is it the obesity? Not as much. That's not as the leading predictor. The leading predictors here is social interaction and social integration. And that's something what AI can't do. And there's many different reasons there. So we're definitely moving in the right direction. But I just think we've got too much trust that we've made it there when we haven't,
You mentioned digital twins. The first time I ever heard about digital twins was actually in the Web3 crypto space. So I have a good understanding what a digital twin is in that space. But what is a digital twin in the health space?
Yeah, so this is where we can look at sequencing, genomics, we can look at longitudinal data, and we're starting to develop these digital twins where we can test medications. We can run these studies, thousands of studies instantly to see what medication is going to be best. When someone has cancer, what's the best approach here is typically there's the biopsy, the cancer gets sent off, and you can determine what exact type of medications are going to be best for the individual. There's ways now with digital twins that we could potentially know that prior. So it's just a way for us to shorten the gap between testing, and also it's enabling medication development too. We know that it can cost, $1 billion to develop a new medication and a decade before it passes. And we know 90% of medications don't pass human clinical trials. So the digital twin would enable that R&D, that research and development from the data, what they have from the genomics, from the longitudinal data and all these other factors. And is going to be able to run these tests to help guide that innovation of that next stage of growth.
So a digital twin is essentially like resembling me as an individual in a digital form that has access to all of my data, even my genes and everything, and they can just like test this kind of methods without actually interfering with me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it enables you to have personalized intervention without the lag measure. That's ultimately what it is. It's personalized intervention without lag measure, and it's heightened innovation without as much as the cost.
Who is already doing this?
There's companies which, there's even multiple people doing TED Talks on this 2 years ago, to put it into perspective, right? Okay. So there's companies which have been around for quite some time, and it's definitely the way that we're moving, so to speak.
Yeah, like me also being very active in the tech space and in the crypto space and in the health and longevity space, I see like how everything is moving super fast, and I feel that so many people just lacking the understanding of like what they should trust and what they should look at and what they should actually like rely on. Because if somebody wants to go through a change, like the first phase is just like to be aware, right? So this is where what information is. Then the second one is implementation. And this is where I feel that so many people fail. Because like, okay, I consume all of this information, I educated myself, and so many people suddenly think like, okay, I already have it, but they haven't actually implemented it. And then the third phase would be the actual embodiment of who they wanted to become in the first place. And as me working with people, where we assess the person's state, like physically, mentally, emotionally, and we also bring in some spiritual aspect into this assessment. One of the things that like really stood out to me that was very common across everyone was stress. So if we can go a bit more specific into one particular thing that I also feel that's very much present in so many people's life is stress.
Yeah.
So what's your take on stress? Because I heard so many contradicting and also conflicting opinions on stress.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let's start with the definition. Stress is an ambiguous term used to encapsulate anything which challenges the homeostasis of the body. So the homeostasis is that natural equilibrium of how your body's designed and prefers to function. And anything which knocks that off balance is classed as a stressor. Stress isn't just psycho-emotional stress, and there's many different variants of psycho-emotional stress. It could be isolation, it could be loneliness, it could be depression, it could be perfectionism, right? And then we have physical stresses. That could be injury, for example, poor biomechanics, poor breathing patterns. Then we have environmental, and that could be the fact that we spend 90% of our adult life indoors, or the pollutants what we're exposed to. And then there's also physiological, and the physiological component is to do with the toxicants, the hormones, our gut microbiology, and all these other factors there too. So all of those different things are stressors, and there's many different stressors. And when we're stressed, that is going to challenge the body's ability to buffer what we call the allostatic load, okay? And this is the body's stress resilience level. And the more compromised your health is, the worse your sleep is, the worse your breathing is, the more inflamed you are, the less food you've been consuming, the less chance you have at buffering the stresses which you're exposed to. So I think when we talk about stress, there's a number of things that we have to take into account. Number one, can we just eliminate the stress? Number two, can we reduce the stress? Number three, can we increase resilience? And then number four is, can we change perspective? And this is the deeper one, which most people overlook. And we've seen this time and time again with studies. And there was a study done on 33,000 individuals. And it found that individuals which had high levels of stress and viewed their stress as harmful to their health had a 43% higher than normal chance of dying from all causes. But on the flip side, individuals which had high levels of stress but did not view it as harmful to their health had a lower chance of dying from all-cause mortality. So that really shows you that the perception of stress equally contributes to its damaging effects on the body too. So this is why when we talk about stress, we have to look at, we do a stress audit and we assess all these different stressors, and we look at scaling it on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of frequency. How frequently are you exposed to this stressor on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis? And then the second scoring criteria we look at is intensity, because maybe they're not exposed to it on a daily basis, but maybe it's a weekly basis, and they might score it as a 10 out of 10 for intensity. And that's going to help you understand what stresses you have to focus on first. And that's when we look to completely eliminate and remove those stresses if possible. And if not, we try to reduce them. The third, we increase resilience. And the fourth, try to change perspective. And that's the approach.
How does someone know that they are stressed? Like, what are some of the cues?
So we've got different stages of stress, and I'm just going to really generalize this, because we can talk about there's a seven zone model of stress, but we're going to really split it down into stressed and wired and stressed and tired. Okay. Now, typically when someone's stressed, what happens is we have a stressful event, we increase things like our catecholamines, and then around 10 minutes later from the stressful event, we release cortisol. And cortisol is technically our anti-stress hormone. It's there to subside the inflammation, what we have produced from the stressor. But generally what happens over time when people have high levels of stress, they start secreting more and more cortisol, more and more of these other stress hormones, and they start to have this adrenaline-based response where they're feeling anxious and agitated and maybe even aggressive or passive aggressive. And the symptoms here, what we typically see with this stressed and wired, we'll find it that individuals have racing thoughts going through their mind. They find it harder to sleep at night. Maybe they're craving carbohydrates in the evening. Maybe they consume more than 50% of the calories in the latter part of the day. They might be emotionally sensitive. They might have headaches, tension. They might have twitchy eyes, cramping of the calves, and that's because the increased catecholamines is going to deplete magnesium because you're going to require more comp to break down those catecholamines. Now, that's typically the first part of stress dysfunction, is that stressed and wired. But then gradually over time, we become less and less responsive, and we start to develop things like cortisol resistance, and we become less and less efficient at secreting it. And gradually the individual goes from stressed and wired to stressed and tired, and this is where they're feeling more fatigued, and this is where they're going to have tiredness throughout the day. They're going to be possibly snoozing in the morning. They're going to be craving salt this time because that's an adrenal stimulant. They're going to be just feeling like just pretty flat and apathetic, and they're going to be more prone to injuries flaring up too. And that's that latter stage of it. So they're the kind of symptoms, and we overlook symptoms because they're cost-free, they're non-invasive, but they still provide us with valuable insights. But then we also have objective measures what we can assess too. We have things like blood pressure. We can do a simple blood pressure assessment where we can take someone's blood pressure from sitting and they stand, and if it increases by over 10%, we can show that's a maladaptive response. We can even do that with rest and heart rate. We can look into the dilation of the pupils to see if there's a delay in the dilations of the pupils when when the eyes have been closed for around 30 seconds and they open it, and that can show a delay with the autonomics. We can even go to the extent of getting someone to close their eyes and shake their head left to right for around 30 seconds, and if they start to develop nausea, dizziness, or migraines, then we know that there's probably an issue with the vestibular system, and maybe there's a neuroinflammatory response there, which is obviously going to be either a cause or effect from stress. So there's all these different things we can do outside of looking on blood work and looking into DHEAS, cortisol, and all these other factors there.
I intentionally wanted to ask that question because I think, as you said it yourself, that we tend to overlook this kind of symptoms. And it's almost like completely normalized as well. Yeah, it's normal to feel tired. It's normal that my mind is racing all the time before I go to sleep. But do you think like being in a stressed state is normal?
I think practice makes permanent, not perfect. So whatever situation someone is in is serving a purpose for them at that moment in time. And that's the challenge, right? Okay. So they may be stressed because their life may be threatened or their income may be threatened. And in modern day situations, that is equally threatening their life. And is that stress valued? Is that stress appropriate? Arguably, yes. It's going to push them a little bit further. It's going to enable them to take more action. So we always have to seek to understand before being understood. And I think, is the stress warranted? I would say it's warranted, but is the lifestyle warranted? Possibly not. I think we're living a maladaptive lifestyle, but our body is responding perfectly to how it should be responding. And that's the catch. The issue isn't our body or inside of us. The issue is how we are actually engaging with this body and how we choose to live with that.
How should I know which option should I choose? Like, should I reduce it, avoid it, or is this just a sign for me that I'm weak and I need to build like more resilience? Because for most people, especially who are like very ambitious and they're out there, they're slaying dragons, working hard, doing all of that stuff, like they use it as fuel, and then they take it as like, I need to build more resilience so I can slay more. Where do we draw the line? Like, when do we know we need to reduce, and when is it that we know like, oh, like we need to actually toughen up?
Yeah. So first of all, it's the chronological order of how it works. Is number one, we look to remove, right? Can we remove this stress, or is the thing which is creating stress absolutely quintessential? And if it is, we can't remove it. Okay, cool. Step two, can we reduce our exposure to that? And how can we reduce the exposure? Is it that we delegate? Is it that we systemize? Is it that we just change what we do, right? And if we can't do that, then we look at resilience building, okay? And that's kind of like the third stage. With the fourth stage, which is perception, that's much harder to do, right? Okay, it's much harder to do. But we see that. We see it. We see these now emerging practices to help people have a graceful transition for the end of life, you know, and it changes the philosophy of how they view death, right? And it's a hard thing to do, but we see that happening. But that's why resilience precedes perception, despite perception possibly having a greater benefit to the stressor itself. It's just harder to do that, right? So in regards to how to tell if someone is needing to increase their stress resiliency, well, if someone is stressed, there's a few simple things here. If someone has an argument with their partner and they have thoughts racing through their head for 30 minutes or longer, that's a factor. If they have a poor night's sleep and they get run down and they frequently get cold and flus, that's another indication that they have low stress resiliency. So just those two factors, we can look at the mind and we can look at the body, and we can look at, cool, when you have an argument, when you have a stressful event, does it ruminate through your mind? Or alternatively, it could be in addition, when you have poor night's sleep or when you're stressed, are you more prone to illness? Are you more prone to colds and flus?
So there is someone who I work with, and he just shared it with me yesterday that whenever he finds himself in a stressful situation, he already made the link that his body is responding and he starts to feel itchy. Do you think that there could be a correlation?
It can definitely be correlated. I mean, when you're stressed, you're going to be increasing more histamine. So that could be the factor. Generally, when we look at itching, there's a few different chemical reactions which can lead to itching, but histamine is usually the main culprit there. So if he's stressed and increases histamine and he starts to itch, we'd also want to check for other histamine-related symptoms, like is there multiple allergies? Does he have hay fever? Does he have a congested nose? Does he find it hard breathing? Does he have any digestive issues? Does he have mold exposure? Does he have SIBO? Like all of these would indicate, hey, maybe there's a likelihood for higher histamine levels. And then obviously when someone's stressed, that's going to change two factors. It's going to increase histamine production, but also decrease the degradation of histamine too. And there's many different mechanisms of how high stress can stop histamine from being broken down as effectively. But one of those mechanisms is when we're stressed, we're going to be burning through more of our methyl groups to aid with COMT expression, but we also need methylation to effectively to produce histamine N-methyl transferase, which is one of the mechanisms of how histamine is broken down.
So a person who is experiencing these kind of symptoms, the first stage would be just to remove the stressors, right? And then if they have been removed and the person is still responding, whether in a psychological or physiological way, then the next step would be to build more resilience. But the third thing you said, which was perception, yeah, that's really hard just to change that. But if I would just like change my perception of stress, let's say that from one day to another, if I have the superpower to decide that I just don't believe that these stressors actually impact me and my health, are you saying that just with that I can impact the outcome of all how those stressors are affecting me?
Yeah, it changes the biological response. Yeah, so your psychology determines your physiology and your physiology determines your psychology. Now, the caveat to all this is just because when someone's stressed, they itch, what we have to view is the symptom trap, right? Okay, so just because they're stressed, they itch doesn't mean stress is the problem. Well, we have to investigate why. And generally, we have to go as far away from the symptom as we can to try and find the root cause. So when looking into this, we have a philosophy, and that philosophy is that it's more important to understand the client than the goal the client has, and it's more important to understand the patient than the disease the patient has. And this is where we would take a full body perspective assessment and try to find out all these different things because, yeah, fair enough, someone may be stressed and that's increasing histamine and that's increasing the itching, but maybe there's a deeper issue with something like leaky gut, or maybe they're deficient in copper or B6 or something like this, which is required for diamine oxidase to break down the histamine. And maybe if we were addressing that underlying gut issue, for example, what they had, they wouldn't be as suffering from the stress as what they would be, because they're going to have a greater health capacity and more resilience. So this is why we have to read the body and view each symptom with curiosity to try and go as far away from the symptoms as possible to see what root cause we have to start with first.
So what would be maybe like some of the tests or questions that people should be asking from themselves if they would like to address their challenge with stress?
Let's just say if someone is challenged with stress, right? Okay. The easiest way to help that is to generally fix their sleep. Okay. And it's a cause or effect, right? When someone's stressed, they tend to sleep worse. Okay. Or if someone sleeps bad, their stress is worse. So generally the first point of call is to look into their sleep. And when we're talking about sleep, it's not just sleep quality, it's sleep quantity, continuity, and consistency. So it means going to bed and waking up the same time, not just on weekdays, but also weekends. So we don't have that social jet lag, which increases the risk of cardiovascular events like heart attacks by 24%. But it also means continuity, appropriately going through each stage of sleep effectively. And that relies on making sure that there are certain nutrients, which is ample in the body and not an excess of things like cortisol or inflammation, which can hinder that transition. But then also making sure that they're not waking up during their sleep and they're actually sleeping a good chunk of time, anywhere from 6 to 9 hours. It's dependent on the individual. So generally speaking, that's the first thing what's going to be the big needle mover. And I think a lot of people, they jump to all these other tests. Like, don't get me wrong, the best test out there in the world of functional medicine to assess your cortisol is the Dutch panel, because it's going to look into the metabolized, and it's going to look into the free cortisol, and it's going to give you a full picture, and it gives you a 4-point binaural kind of pattern, so you can see the full cortisol curve throughout the day. It's way more effective than a salivary examination, which gives you less than 5% of the cortisol picture. Fair enough, it gives you the pattern throughout the day, but it doesn't give you the full intake. And blood work isn't really going to be the best to solely look at stress chemicals, because the reality is how many people enjoy getting their blood work taken, how many people experience challenges like sitting in the waiting room for longer than expected, running late, meeting traffic, all these things there. So it can be too much of an erroneous variable, the event of getting their blood taken, that it isn't representative of their day-to-day life. So yeah, the Dutch panel is best, but ultimately too many people jump to these fancier tests, and there's a lot they could do prior. There's a lot just by fixing up their diet, fixing up their lifestyle, fixing up their sleep, that they could clear some of the smoke to actually see where the main fires are. And rather than going straight to testing first, I think just a period of 2 weeks prior where they're just doing some low-hanging fruit things where they can actually try to lift that health of their body, they're going to get much more out of the tests too. And the main test, what you generally start with either way, is generally going to be a blood test, because the blood test is going to give you an insight into how well your body is coping with the stress. Okay, it's not just, am I stressed, yes or no? Well, we can generally tell that from subjective questions. We need to determine, what's the root cause, what's the challenges, what's our main focus point here? Because like I mentioned earlier, healing happens in layers. It's not linear. So it means doing the right things at the right time, not the right thing at the wrong time, because it's still the wrong thing.
What would be maybe like some of the questions that someone should ask from themselves in order to determine what are the things that they should be doing, or why they should be doing the things that's going to help them to deal with stress?
Okay, so what questions someone could ask themselves to see how they could handle stress better, per se? The first thing is assessing the sleep. The second is the environment, right? Because we know that having a peer group, another factor here is having more than 2 to 3 friends that you can lean on in hard times. Okay, so that's a huge factor. Sleep, then it's your peer group. The third is going to be, it has to be nutrition. It has to be nutrition. Yeah, generally following what would class as mainly a paleo-based diet. They would be the simple factors there, which someone could say, hey, am I actually eating clean? Am I being around the right people? Am I sleeping properly? They're the 3 main things.
Yeah, so like one technique that I also apply in my program, I call it PPT, places, people, and things. So I ask the individual to actually assess like what gives them energy and what takes energy away from them. And then after that exercise, they have a very clear list of the things that actually create stress for them and deplete their energy. And then the next step is just to see like how we can reduce that or remove that. Right.
Nice.
So these are already great. When it comes to like some of the solutions or things that we can do for someone who is, let's say, like if we are still staying on the topic of stress, that I know that some people take medication, right? So like what would be maybe like some of the practices that you would recommend someone to deal with stress? Like, is there any other like functional medicine or techniques that you advocate for here?
Yeah. So there's quite a lot, right? Okay. So we have something called the client report card, and the client report card is how we design a plan for a client. And the very first thing what we have to look at is exclusions. Okay, we have to see what's making them worse. We can't get dry in the shower, so we have to determine what are they doing which is compromising the health of their body, and we have to eliminate that. Okay, so if they have MCAS and living in a mold-ridden place, they have to change where they live. If there's other factors like they have celiac and they're consuming gluten, obviously we have to remove the gluten, right? So exclusion is the first factor. The second, we're going to look into the calories. Now, generally when someone is stressed, we're going to go with a maintenance level of calories. We're not going to go with a deficit because that's going to put their body into a heightened state of stress where they're going to be increasing catecholamines in search for food from an anthropological based perspective at least. So the second, after that, we're going to go into macronutrients, and this is where we're probably going to go with more of a medium level of protein, slightly higher level of carbohydrates, and a medium level of fats, right? So the fats, we're going to go with 1 gram per kilo body weight. We're going to go with, for males, anywhere from 1.8 to 2.3 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. It's dependent on a number of different factors. One factor is how efficient they are at breaking down protein that comes into the stomach acid. For females, it could be as little as 1.4. It could be as maximum around 1.8. Unless they're training an individual, we could push it up higher. And then the remainder of the calories, what they're consuming there, is going to be coming from carbohydrates, right? And we want to be having a maintenance level, right? And the reason why we have carbohydrates, a higher level of carbohydrates, preferably, is that when we consume carbohydrates, what happens is that we increase insulin, and by increasing insulin, we lower cortisol. We also increase serotonin, and serotonin converts to melatonin. So it means it's going to lower the stress chemicals, but also help with sleep at night. Now, as we move from macronutrients, we look at micronutrients, and this is where we have to look into things like magnesium. We have to make sure that they're having ample levels of magnesium. We need at least 10 milligrams of magnesium per kilogram of body weight, right? And if they're stressed, we might actually have to push that up to 15 milligrams. Now, typically, we can't get that quantity from food alone. So when we look into the best food sources of magnesium, most people say cacao, right? It's actually maybe like the 5th best food source. We have things like sunflower seeds, which are typically better. But then we go not just with magnesium, but we also want to have things like B6, because that's also essential for aiding with the stress response. And then as we move through, then we can look into some functional foods. And there's certain functional foods which can aid and work with the body. But if we're just viewing the body through the lens of stress, we know typically that things like chocolate outside of the magnesium has been found to increase serotonin and lower cortisol. We know things like tart cherries could be beneficial here too. So there's just, some variance factors there. We may be going with more resistant-based carbohydrates because that's going to promote more butyrate, and that's going to promote better gut diversity, and better gut diversity is going to aid with better neurotransmitter regulation. And as we move through from that, we're going to look into herbal teas. And in regards to herbal teas, this is where we're going to be considering things like maybe chamomile or lemon balm and petitioning that in the evening. If they're suffering from more fatigue in the morning, generally, we're not going to be going with a high carbohydrate diet. We're going to be going more isocaloric, and we're going to be going with licorice root in the morning there instead, because that's going to inhibit the 11 dehydrogenase. Sorry, the 11, what's it, the type 2B dehydrogenase? I can't remember exactly the enzyme. It's quite late here for me compared to my usual time, so I'm a little bit tired right now. But it inhibits the enzyme which converts cortisol to cortisone, which means the cortisol is going to stay more active in the body. And then, and only then, can we start to consider supplementation, right? Okay. So in regards to supplementation, well, let's just look if someone's more stressed and tired. If they're stressed and tired, we're going to be going with things like licorice root extract. We're going to be petitioning that in the morning. Or we're going to go with Korean ginseng, right? That's going to be very beneficial. If someone is more stressed and wired, this is where we're going to be promoting more of a GABAergic based response. And this is probably where we're going to be going with a blend of different chelated versions of magnesium. We're going to be going with lemon balm. We could be considering these kind of other kind of like things like theanine as such, if you want to lower the stress but still maintain alertness. Theanine's very beneficial there. You have it midday, you don't have it in the evening. So there's all these different things there. But that's just viewing the body through the lens of a keyhole, right? And we're just thinking the only thing wrong with them is stress. That's never the case. There's all these other variables what we have to consider and add into that equation so we can totally curate the best plan for that individual.
You know, something just dawned on me that as you were saying that how you would adjust someone's calorie intake depending on the level of stress that say that they are experiencing. Do you think that most fitness coaches, this is a bit like off topic, but do you feel that most fitness coaches actually consider that? Because most of the guys who I met or I consulted before, like, okay, what's your goal? This is where you want to get. That's the body fat that we are aiming for. And then they never really asked me questions like how I'm actually feeling. Like, you know, am I stressed? And then it actually could be an added stressor to my life while I'm already experiencing stress if I'm changing some of these factors.
Indefinitely. Like it's if we mentor not just doctors and naturopaths and health coaches, but we also mentor personal trainers too. And what we see is that health is a physiological prerequisite for any physical performance-based result, right? So even though someone may be wanting to drop some body fat, right, but they're stressed, by addressing those stressors first and improving their health, they actually get far better outcomes in regards to their physical performance.
Well, then I think just based on that, probably like every single personal trainer should start with that because I feel that that's like widely missed, that they don't fully understand where their client is, and then they should like create the plan accordingly. So something that you mentioned before, this bio-individuality, that again, like everybody is different. So one of my favorite quotes recently is that my description is not your prescription. So what actually maybe worked for me is not necessarily what's going to work for you and vice versa. So we need to properly assess you.
Yeah,
Right?
we have a similar philosophy that one man's food is another man's poison. So just because it's good for you might not be good for me, so to speak. So yeah, we're definitely in agreement.
Yeah, yeah. And there was something that AJ Brooks, one of our mutual friends, also shared on the podcast before, was that about the ice bath. And
Yeah,
that was exactly like if somebody is already like stressed, like ice bath is also like another stressor. So we should not just like blindly follow exactly what we heard that ice bath is going to help with your stress. It can actually have an opposite effect if
yeah.
you are not in that state to actually handle that.
Or if you have Raynaud's, for example, which is an
What is
autoimmune
that?
condition. It's an autoimmune condition, so it correlates with anti-centromere antibodies, and it's where there's issues with the blood flow in the extremities. So ice baths can actually create too much of a stressor for individuals, and they can actually get ill after. I have Raynaud's, right? So when I go in an ice bath, if I do longer than a minute, I'm ill the next few days.
Okay, I think like most people have never even heard of this, or they
Yeah,
have not even researched it. Maybe the only thing they did is that they asked ChatGPT, and that was
yeah.
it.
Yeah, exactly. And 1 out of 6 individuals have an autoimmune condition, which completely changes the game of how you approach them.
Well, so again, like everything starts with a proper assessment. Try to
Yeah.
understand yourself, where you are, and then decide on the actions that you are going to be taking in order to reach that goal that you have set out for yourself. What if someone's goal is to heal from something? That obviously there's like so many things that we can heal from. It could be like physical, it could be mental, it could be emotional, it could be so many different kind of things. But if we still like stay on the physical side of things, this concept has been like really tickling my interest over the past couple of months, which is self-healing. To what capacity do you think that someone can actually heal themselves without external intervention?
Interesting. So, is this in regards to when you say external intervention, you're not talking about medication, you're not talking about things like this, you're just talking about food and lifestyle, right?
Or just mindset, right? So one of the things
Mm,
that we touched on was the perception of stress
yeah.
actually can impact like how much stress is impacting us, right? So
Yeah.
if I just believe that stress is not impacting me, then it's not going to impact me that much. What if I believe that my body knows exactly what it needs to do in order to heal me? So here could be like we have our immune systems. It's like constantly going and working there in order to heal us. And also another example would be placebo, which we also mentioned earlier today, that we didn't really do anything to the body itself, but we changed something in the mind, like a belief. So I think the question is that to what capacity someone can actually heal themselves without medication and any kind of like external intervention?
Yeah, so great question. It's a big can of worms, right? Because our body does have an innate intelligence, but unfortunately, we've bastardized our body so much that it's full of pollutants, heavy metals, and all these other factors that quite often our body doesn't really know what it is anymore. And we can see that again with all these different things what we've been exposed to from certain medical interventions at a young age, and potentially having all these different other things there. We're seeing just in society, there's a macrocosm here where people are losing their sense of identity of who they even believe themselves to be. They're now questioning, oh, I might not be a male anymore, I might be female. So we can see if this is happening on a psychological component, where they're now viewing themselves as different and they're associating to a different identity, then what's happening on a cellular level? There is that misidentification of self. And generally, that misidentification of self is because we haven't, lived in the way that our body is required to sustain its function and its natural state, and it's now compromised. So I think, yes, that innate intelligence, I think we do have a great capacity to heal from a lot of things, not all things. But I think we've drifted so far away from how our body should be functioning that we can't really access that well.
So there is a Dr. Alberto Villoldo, and he said something that like out of the 40 million different species on Earth, only humans, whales, and dolphins don't have death programmed into their DNA. Do you agree or disagree with this statement?
They don't have death programmed into DNA. Their DNA,
meaning
like
that we could
apoptosis.
actually live forever. Yes.
I think it's actually crocodiles and lobsters which have better outcomes than them. So when you look into the genetic structure of lobsters and crocodiles, there's some fascinating stuff with those animals. So yeah, I think it's not. Well, I personally, from what I know, I am more fascinated about them than whales and dolphins. Even though I see whales every single day from where I live, which is pretty cool. But yeah, I think the lobsters and the crocodiles, that's cool. But then we're getting into that gene editing CRISPR territory, so to speak, and it's then getting a little bit interesting because this experience of life, we try to view it from a very limited lens of perception, right? And when we look into the light spectrum, we only see a fragment of what is available in terms of the light spectrum, but certain animals and things like this can view things what we can't, right? So we try to have this overarching ideology that we know what life is, and I generally think we don't know what life is, right? And I equally think we don't know what death is. And I think this experience of life has a purpose to serve, and we can't escape it. So when we look into living longer and escaping what is ultimately destined for us, I think we should embrace that. And I don't think it's something that we should be scared of as such. I think we should actually, potentially be looking forward to it. As crazy as that sounds, it's just the next version of this experience, which we're yet to step into, which is a very confronting thing for people to grasp. But ultimately, when we look at the perception of death, we hear of these stories of people which have NDEs, near-death experiences, or out-of-body experiences, and they experience these profound things, and they say it's this state of urethral bliss. I mean, I've experienced NDEs and OBEs myself, right? So maybe that's probably why I'm more comfortable with the idea. But I think we're over fascinated on this concept that nothing is perfect, right? We come from this viewpoint that us as humans can perfect things, that whether it was God or whether it was the spiritual component was created with errors. And it's our responsibility and our capacity to do better than what the spiritual world or what God has done. And we have the capacity to make it even better. And I think that's that egoism coming from a very limited mindset. So I don't know how we got onto this subject, but yeah, we're speaking about whales and dolphins, but yeah, that's my view. I think, it's not necessarily about living longer, it's living better.
Yeah, the way we got there is not just about the dolphins, but it's also that apparently humans is also one of those species that does not have death programmed into the DNA. So what it tells me is that we could actually live forever, assuming that we were given the right conditions.
I don't know about that because we have like P53 mechanism and apoptosis where we have cell program death. And when we don't have cellular death, we have senescent cells. And then the senescent cells are defective zombie cells, which haven't kind of gone through that cellular renewal process. And that becomes malignant and we get immunosenescence and other factors. So I don't know what the definition of death is here, but I know from a cellular level, there is cell program death, which is actually part of our cellular clearance mechanism, which is actually very beneficial. Interestingly, coming back into the death being beneficial, it's a beneficial thing, right, for us. And when we don't enable our cells to die, that's when we become and have senescent cells, and that's when we have to utilize senolytics and all these other things and stimulate autophagy. So yeah, interesting. I'll have to do some further research because I haven't looked at the other side.
So just based on that, what you shared, do you believe that the mission that Brian Johnson is on is actually feasible? Do you think that he could actually not die and live forever?
Some of these people. So unfortunately, let me just generalize here. Okay, unfortunately, a lot of people in the biohacking and longevity scene are making fraudulent statements to further promote their products, their own agenda, or their own publicity. And generally, a lot of them aren't grounded in evidence. When we look into this whole longevity basis as well, when looking into the world of longevity, there has been minimal transgenerational longitudinal studies on human longevity, okay, because it requires the researchers to live, die, new researchers to take their shoes, live, die, new researchers to take their shoes, live, and then assess. And that's only 3 generations what they're assessing, right? Because researchers are going to live just as long as the subjects, which are both humans, right? Okay, so there hasn't been this longitudinal, large mass scale study. I mean, the best we've got is China, I think, and it's 35,000. But most of the literature is done on fleas, mice, and things like this, right? Okay, and they have a very small life expectancy, which means it's easier for the researchers to go through multiple generations, test, then innovate and research it, but it doesn't translate to humans. Okay, so I think there's a lot of big talk about living to 150, right? But I think a lot of these individuals are escaping their kind of reality, so to speak, and I think there's no grounded literature to prove that. Ultimately, I'm very evidence-based, like what we teach on, there's over 2,000 published medical journals that I've read, which have met my inclusion criteria, which we've included into the Institute. So whenever I speak, it has to be grounded in substantiated evidence. And unfortunately, if I was in their shoes, I wouldn't be able to make the claims they are saying because the evidence is not there.
But there's also something beyond some of these studies, and there's also something beyond like medicine, right? So I think like we kind of like segued into it a little bit already with the spiritual stuff and life and death and self-healing and all of those things. So what would be maybe like some of the other practices that you think that can help someone to drastically increase their health span, but that's like outside of the conventional or modern way of looking at health?
I think the understanding that everything we do in life is to feel. And just by understanding that concept, it helps us understand our actions, our behavior, and the consequences that we may have. And I think that's going to help people have a stronger navigating compass as opposed to looking at certain things to add into their very limited time per day. I think changing how they view their time per day is the better outcome there. So ultimately recognizing that everything we do in life is to feel, and sometimes we can enable that feeling ourselves or sooner without the expected outcome attached to a certain event.
And when it comes to this thing, just to increase our health span, where do you think that mindset, breath, environment, like move the needle more versus like medicine? And where is it that medicine remains still essential for us?
Yeah, so we always say if you get hit by a car, ginseng or magnesium oil is not going to save you. Yeah, or if you need a C-section, you're not going to do some Reiki, right? So there's definitely a time and place for emergency intervention. It's there, but it's the last stage of the health cycle. When we talk about a lot of this emergency intervention, we have chronic disease, we have acute disease, and those two categories there are fantastic for the medical intervention from, medicines or surgery. We have dysfunction, and dysfunction is kind of 50-50. Dysfunction is the pharmaceutical world going to help, or is the kind of more holistic, integrative world going to help? But then the further we move away from this, we have things like dysfunction, we have subclinical, we have deficiencies, and then we have borderline, and then we have normality, and then we have functionality, and then we have performance, and then we have health, and then we have optimal well-being. Well, all of these factors here are centered around our health. And health is, again, another ambiguous term. Health is everything within and without the human experience. So health isn't just limited to food or nutrients or supplements, but breathing is critical. We have the 10 pillars of health, for example, which is movement, and we have tribe, and we have breathing, and we have sleep, and we have thinking, and we have drinking. We have all these different pillars, right? And breathing is absolutely essential. There's a famous quote, the bravest thing we do each day is breathe out, right? And that just shows you how valuable breath is. And there's many different methods of breath work to elicit different physiological responses in the body. So I think most people don't breathe properly, and that's for many different reasons as well. I mean, we spend 18 years of our adult life sat down, right? And when we're sitting down, we're developing this internally rotated kyphotic posture, which is stopping our ribs from expanding appropriately. Most people don't breathe through their nasal cavity because they've not been eating hard foods. Like when we look into the literature from Weston A. Price, we're eating these kind of emulsified foods, which are overcooked and mushy, which changes the dental palate so it becomes more narrow. And now they breathe through their mouth as opposed to their nose, and therefore they're getting less nitric oxide and all these other variables. So I think, yes, long story short, breathing and things like this are absolutely essential. But I personally, from what I've seen, and we have exposures to 20,000 clients on an annual basis, breath work is definitely not alone to heal from chronic disease. From these other things, it's definitely going to be an adjunctive therapy, but is usually interventions which are equally beneficial.
Yeah, because I see that there's a bit of a separation already in the longevity space as well. So I see that one tribe is kind of like going back to basics, going back to nature and embracing that. And the other tribe is more focusing on technology, right? So I see that there is like a separation, but probably the truth somewhere lies in between. But I also wanted to ask you, where do you stand?
Yeah, so how I describe what we do is we appreciate traditional philosophies, but we utilize conventional advancements. So we appreciate the traditional philosophies of, everything within and without the human experience. We have to work with that and viewing the body as an all system biology perspective rather than through the lens of the keyhole. But we equally utilize conventional advancements more for the assessments, more for the diagnostics per se. And this is where we would look into things like microtox profile analysis, organic acid testing, Dutch testing, or whatever. That's where we utilize that. We utilize the technology more so on the front end and the ancestral wisdom on the back end.
I love it. I love it. I definitely share the same opinion on this.
Yeah.
I have prepared a couple of fire questions for you.
Yeah, sure.
So quick questions, quick answers. And I think this would be perfect to start with. that which traditional philosophy do you think that everyone should know about in order to increase their health span?
Which traditional philosophy? I think it comes back to the premises of one man's food is another man's poison. I think that's the simplest thing what people could adopt and start to recognize that, hey, if one man's food is another man's poison, then I have to find out what foods I can eat and maybe shouldn't eat. And that starts that health investigation journey in a very simple way, which they, hopefully consume, 2 to 4 meals on a daily basis. So it compounds over time versus doing something like breath work, which they may do 2 or 3 times a week and then stop. They're always going to be eating for the rest of their life. So I think that's going to have the greatest net compound gain.
I love that answer, because this would be also the answer that I would give to so many people who very heavily advocate for one type of diet versus the other. Here we talk about carnivores, vegans, right? First, like, understand yourself and then make your decision.
Yeah, exactly.
What is your number one personal non-negotiable when it comes to staying in peak performance?
I have to stop work. I'm breaking the rule here, okay? I have to stop work by 6 p.m. because if I work past 6 p.m., how my mind works, I won't sleep till 3 a.m. So generally, that is my non-negotiable, which the rule's broken for this occasion, which is absolutely fine and warranted. But that is my non-negotiable, because sleep is a absolutely essential factor, right? It helps us think better. It gives us more energy. I think sleep is so overrated, but it's where we spend a third of our life, right? Okay, ironically, right? And for me, I can do all these different things to move the needle on sleep, but the main thing is, because my brain thinks really fast, I also have a speech impediment, I have dyslexia, so sometimes my words jumble and I can't speak as fast as I think, right? So I think really, really fast. And when I stay up late working, my mind just wants to keep running, because that's how it's engineered. So yeah, it has to be having a hard cutoff from technology in terms of working technology devices, whether that's Zoom calls or laptop and stuff like that. And I need to have basically an unwind routine.
What is one thing that every founder, entrepreneur should stop doing today if they care about their longevity?
Every founder and entrepreneur, this is going to be a different question, well, different answer to the question, right? Okay. Should stop doing. Okay, this is a very, very, very interesting answer, okay? So I believe every founder and entrepreneur spends far too much time overindulging on their own product. And they become the master of that product and knowing all the features and everything like this. But because they're a founder or an entrepreneur, they're running a business and their product's already at a level which is good enough to serve their clientele or their customers to get their intended result they want. I should at least hope so. And what they would better spend their time doing is actually learning proper marketing. Because when they learn proper marketing, they can get more lead flow, more cash flow, more systems, more delegation. Now they have more time. And now they have more time, they also have less stress. And they can invest that time willingly with relationships, family, and memories. And that's going to be the thing which is going to enable them to have a better outcome for their health long term. Because they've stopped being so overindulged with making it 1% better or 5% better or fine-tuning this. And actually instead, they've enabled their business to scale and get more cash flow to buy back their time.
Man, that's such an amazing answer. I did not know where you were going with this answer when you started answering it, but I see how everything connects here. I love that.
And founders and entrepreneurs, we have high levels of stress, we overwork, we sacrifice things, we can't add things into our life. I think, if people actually learned more about how to do the marketing, how to set up the ads, run the ads better, and look at lead generation, lead retention, look at the metrics, optimize conversions, I think the health is going to be better. Equally, on the flip side, when someone has a lower level of cash, lower level of liquidity, they tend to have more sensitivity to stressors. They can't consume as much food. They have to work. They have to do this. They have to do that. So that's why if they're a founder or an entrepreneur, that cash flow solves the biggest thing.
Yeah, so increase sales so you can increase your longevity.
Yeah, so stop overindulging on your product. It's probably good enough to get the result. You don't have to be the best, you have to be the best known. So therefore, learn more about the marketing instead, and that's going to help you with the longevity, ironically.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I love that advice. Okay, next question. If all the contacts on your social media were deleted and you could only follow one person for health and wellness, who would you follow?
And I could only follow one person for health and wellness. I don't really follow anyone on social media for those. I follow them because they're my friend, right? I use social media, how social media is intended for social kind of like just keeping people at that arm's reach, and when I need them, I know they're there, and we can engage, or I can have that distant overview of it's cool, they're up to some cool stuff. That's how I personally use it. My team and the business uses it for business, but from the personal side, because the question is the personal based question, unfortunately, I get my health information from PubMed. I don't really get it from anyone else. It comes back into that whole premises, what we said at the start, which is don't trust, verify. So unfortunately, I guess if I had to give you an answer, and I was pushed into a corner and a gun held against my head, what both Katerina, my wife, and I go to, we go to these health tech kind of startup pitching events, right? And we go to that because it's cool to see what's emerging, right? So we go to like these new health tech startups where they get on stage and they pitch, and it enables us to have a great macro view of the direction of the next innovation of health. So it would probably be a health tech VC firm where they're investing into the companies which they believe are going to change the world and they believe are going to have the biggest success. And then it's going to enable me to have foresight and insight into the industry. So it's different. It's a different way for me to gain information gathering.
And one last question. If we put the top 50 PhDs, MDs, researchers on longevity, what is one theory all of you would agree on?
There's a few, like this is actually really cool. All right. Okay. So when looking into this whole longevity kind of concept, right? And it comes back into this daily non-negotiables, right? Large scale studies show that there's basically 3 core things for longevity. Right, it shows that sleeping between 7 and 9 hours. Earlier I said 6 because I respond better on 6, but the literature says 7 to 9 hours. Right, that's premises number 1. Hence why my daily non-negotiable is not to work too late so I can actually get to sleep. That's number 1. Number 2 is exercise. Having 150 minutes of exercise per week. Generally that's proven in the literature to be beneficial for longevity. And the third one is social connection. And when we factor in those, the sleep, the exercise, and the social connection, that accounts for 80% of the health span gains, which contribute towards longevity. Those 3 things. And it's not sexy, but it's true. It's not new, it's true. And that's the thing we'd probably all agree on.
Is there any last message that you would like to share with the audience before we wrap it up?
No, honestly, it's been incredible going over this. I love these random questions. That's how I respond best, and the juice comes out better. But there's so many topics that we teach on. We actually certify people so they get globally recognized and insured in this field to utilize blood work with clients and do bio-individualized nutrition plans. So there's all these different topics that I teach on and that the team teaches on and that we're experienced with as well. It's not just the education, but it's experience too. And we could have exposure to certain things as well. So if there's any particular things what people would love to know more about, just drop me a DM and maybe we can arrange another opportunity to dive into those particular subjects. And equally, for anyone who is looking at learning more about functional blood work, or not just learning more, but maybe wanting to access a tool, we have been working for the past 3 years on a pretty fascinating health management operating system. It's a category defining health operating system. We've invested, well over $1 million into building this, and it's really, really, really good. So if anyone's curious about that, just drop me a message saying MHP, and I can share more insights there too.
So what's the best way for people to find you?
I'm on all platforms, but the predominant platform where my team and myself is on Instagram, which would be Mr. Jake Carter is my personal page, or we have Institute of Health with an underscore at the end. There's that. There's also our website, instituteofhealth.com, or there's my healthprac, which is myhealthprac.com, and they can either reach out via the website or reach out via Instagram.
Okay, amazing. I'm going to drop the links in the comment section or in the description. Guys, you should definitely go and check out what they are working on. I think this is definitely the next evolution of healthcare. So I'm super excited. I'm a big believer in your approach, and I know that you are going to change so many lives. You're already changing mine. So thank you.
I really, really appreciate it. I appreciate this opportunity as well. It's been incredible to do this. I appreciate your time, and I appreciate the audience for listening.